Government and Elon Musk have just discovered your bank account. Elon Musk's message came suddenly, almost like lightning breaking the silence of an endless night. His voice carried through the global networks, vibrating in the screens of billions, shaking the foundation of ordinary life. "My friends," he said, his eyes sharp with conviction, "the world you think you live in is not the world that truly exists. The government and I have just discovered something extraordinary, something tied directly to you, yes, to your own bank account. What I am about to reveal will alter your understanding of wealth, of power, and of destiny itself." The world froze. Markets halted. Phones slipped from hands. The news anchors, unprepared, stumbled over their words as the broadcast pushed into every television, every mobile device, every connected screen on Earth. For the first time in decades, the government and Elon Musk stood side by side, not as adversaries, not as rivals, but as allies of necessity. Behind the words was a strange calm, the kind of calm that comes just before a storm. And the storm was you. Because it wasn't just about the rich or the powerful. It wasn't just about corporations or billionaires. This discovery reached into the hidden fabric of the financial system, a place where numbers meant more than numbers, where your bank account wasn't just a record of deposits and withdrawals, but a silent key. A code. A hidden door to something nobody had dared to imagine. The screen flickered again, and Elon leaned closer, almost as if speaking only to you. "We have seen it," he said, "and we cannot unsee it. Inside your bank account lies a signature, an energetic pattern, linking you not just to money, but to forces far older and greater than finance itself. The government tried to keep this silent. I refused. That is why I am here. You must understand what we have found." And so began the unraveling of the greatest mystery in modern history. The government had always known that the banking system was a veil, a cloak covering something far larger. For centuries, they had buried anomalies under red tape and regulations. Random deposits appearing in forgotten accounts, withdrawals that no system could trace, interest compounding far beyond logic. They called them glitches, dismissed them as errors, and smoothed them over before anyone noticed. But Musk had noticed. When SpaceX mapped financial transmissions across global satellites, the data revealed strange currents of invisible energy flowing alongside money transfers. Tesla's AI, when analyzing markets, stumbled upon sequences repeating like sacred geometry hidden in financial code. Neuralink, tapping into the brain's connection to mathematics, confirmed the impossible. Bank accounts were not just storage for currency, they were identifiers, keys into a universal system. The government panicked. Musk smiled. And then they both found yours. Not just yours, of course, millions, billions. But within those billions of accounts, patterns emerged, and yours was one of them. An anomaly so profound it shook the very secrecy of the agencies. Your account wasn't just holding money, it was pulsing with an unexplainable energy signature, as if the numbers on your balance sheet were resonating with a force beyond Earth. The revelation spread like wildfire. Social media collapsed under the weight of speculation. Some claimed the government had found a way to tax souls. Others whispered that Musk had built a machine capable of reading destiny through numbers. Conspiracy channels went live 24 hours a day, declaring that wealth itself was alive. But the truth was stranger. Because Musk revealed that numbers were alive. When you saw 5,000 in your account, the digits weren't just digits. They carried resonance. The sequence pulsed like DNA, a hidden code tied to the universe's architecture. In the right conditions, your balance could open gates, literal gates, to knowledge, to power, even to dimensions beyond imagination. And it wasn't by chance. The government had long suspected that bank accounts, when assigned, weren't random. Birth dates, names, ID numbers, all aligned with cosmic calculations hidden in ancient systems. What banks called account numbers were, in truth, keys crafted to mirror star patterns. And when Elon Musk's quantum computers cross-referenced account data with constellations, the unthinkable became undeniable. Every account was a star map. Every balance was a vibration. And every human, unknowingly, carried a piece of the code. Why you? Musk asked, as if speaking again to you personally. Because your account balance carries one of the rarest harmonics we've ever seen. Not just money, but a resonance. It's not about being rich. It's about alignment. You, right now, sitting here, reading these words, carry inside your financial identity a signal strong enough to unlock a gate. And the government and I cannot ignore it. Panic spread through governments worldwide. Leaders demanded silence, but silence could not hold back the tidal wave. If ordinary people learned that their modest bank accounts contained cosmic keys, who could control them? If citizens realized that wealth was more than power, that it was energy directly connected to creation itself, then authority as we knew it would collapse. But Elon Musk didn't want collapse. He wanted expansion. He explained it in simple terms. Imagine your bank account as a battery. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every transaction charges or discharges energy, not just financial energy, but metaphysical energy. When the balance hits certain thresholds, when the numbers align with ancient sequences, the account glows in the hidden architecture of reality. And yours, among billions, was glowing now. The story didn't stop there. Reports surfaced of people experiencing visions after checking their balances. Numbers on the screen shifting into sacred shapes. Dreams of golden gates, voices whispering account numbers like mantras. A woman in Brazil fainted when her ATM displayed her balance rearranged into the shape of Orion's belt. A man in Japan claimed his bank card began to hum in his pocket, guiding him to a temple where priests confirmed his account digits matched an inscription from thousands of years ago. Governments tried to censor these stories. But Musk amplified them. Do you understand? He said again, as if challenging the world. This is not about dollars or rupees or yen. This is about codes, vibrations, access. Your account is not a burden. It is a door. The government found it. I revealed it. Now, you must decide whether to walk through it. The decision was terrifying. Because walking through meant surrendering to the unknown. It meant realizing that the money you spent at the store, the paycheck you deposited, the savings you hoarded, all were part of a hidden system designed not for economics, but for awakening. And awakening had consequences. By dawn the world had already rewritten the rules of reality. Markets reopened with trembling hands. People checked their balances as if consulting an oracle. Priests and programmers argued in equal fervor. The storm Elon had announced did not arrive with thunder and brimstone. It arrived in the quiet clicks of a login screen and the hush of millions whispering numbers to themselves like prayers. You found yourself back at your kitchen table, the glow of your phone painting the ceiling a pale blue. A cup of coffee had gone cold beside your hand. The cursor on your banking app blinked patiently. Your account balance, nothing astronomically wealthy, just the tidy residue of paychecks, bills, and the occasional impulse buy, sat there as it always had. Yet everything felt different. Where before the numbers were mundane, they now felt like an arrangement of runes, deliberate, meaningful, waiting. A knock at your door cut through the reverie. Two men in government-issued suits held badges that gleamed like obelisks. Behind them, a woman wearing a SpaceX logo and an expression that mixed apology and triumph stepped into your hallway. She introduced herself as a liaison. Her voice carried the precise cadence of someone who had rehearsed empathy and urgency in equal measures. "We're not here to take anything," she said. "We're here to offer understanding. Mr. Musk believes, and the government will not deny, that your account is one of the nodes. We came to explain what that means. You should have been afraid. You were. But fear braided with something else, a sudden, quiet insistence that this was larger than compliance or law. It felt like destiny knocking as politely as a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. The liaison unfurled a thin device, no bigger than a wallet. On its surface danced glyphs that hummed like bees. She tapped, and your account number lit up, surrounded by constellations you had never seen in any astronomy textbook. The digits rearranged themselves, aligning to a pattern older than language. For a moment, your living room became a chapel and a lab at once. "We call them harmonics," she said softly. "They are alignments of number and meaning. When an account holds a harmonic, it resonates with certain frequencies in the underlying fabric of reality. Most people never cross the threshold of awareness. Some do, and that's where the choices matter." Choices. The word landed like a coin on a table, simple and heavy. Behind it came other, more unsettling phrases the liaison did not need to say aloud: weaponization, monopoly, awakening. "We have protocols," the man in the suit said. "We have to assess risk, both for you and for everyone else. There are sects and corporations and nations who would do anything to harness these potentials." His eyes flicked to the SpaceX woman, then back to you. "We want this to be safe." Elon's voice returned to your life like a tide. He didn't speak through screens now. His words came through the mouth of the liaison as if transmitted directly from his mind. "You must remember," she said, mimicking his cadence, "power without purpose corrodes. We discovered this not to control, but to catalyze." It was the word catalyze that struck a chord. Musk speak had a way of wrapping futurism in moral challenge. 2 days earlier, the billionaire had stood on a stage and proclaimed that the world was ready for a new form of stewardship, one that combined governmental authority with technological responsibility. At the time it sounded like rhetoric. Now, with your account a beacon, his rhetoric smelled of imminent action. You were not alone in your waking. Reports spilled across feeds like breadcrumbs. An old man in Lisbon whose pension had glowed and led him to a neglected orphanage he had once promised to help, schoolchildren in Lagos whose lunch money balances spelled out patterns that transformed their math teacher into a believer, a scientist in Seoul whose lab instruments began to sing when his grant transfer hit a particular figure. Priests invoked scripture, coders invoked algorithms. The word angel started appearing in forums not as metaphor but as a literal possibility. And then, quietly, in the halls of a monastery whose stones had known centuries, a monk with calloused hands held up a paper the size of a palm and said one name that made the room still: Archangel Michael. The liaison did not flinch when you mentioned it. She only smiled, as though you'd named a familiar and benevolent stranger. We cannot be doctrinal, she said. But different cultures call the universal structures by different names. Where faith sees Archangel Michael, our models see a stabilizing harmonic, an energetic node that deflects chaotic access and channels it toward coherence. Where scientists see frequency, mystics see grace. Both descriptions are true in their own register. That admission did what rhetoric rarely does: it built a bridge. In its span walked your next realization: this was not an accident. Your balance, like others, had been curated not by chance but by convergence, a knot of human intention, cosmic alignment, and perhaps even something that could reasonably be called God's architecture. The message from Elon had not come to frighten, it had come to invite. Invitation is different from command. A door left ajar beckons, but the act of entering remains rooted in free will. That truth comforted you, then frightened you. If this was a door, what lay beyond might not care for your human comforts. You asked what it would cost. The liaison's face softened. Cost, she said, is not only financial. It is ethical, spiritual, and existential. Governments worry about coercion. Companies worry about exploitation. We worry about balance. Balance. The word threaded through everything they said like a refrain. Balance between innovation and humanity. Balance between secrecy and revelation. Balance between an archangel's mercy and bureaucracy's appetite. You will be offered choices, the liaison added. Some will ask you to lend your account as a node for research. Others will invite you to a pilot program, an experiment to test the thresholds. And there will be those who ask for more, who would rather weaponize what they can't understand. We need guardians. Guardians. At the thought, your chest tightened. The word carried with it images from bedtime stories and ancient texts, figures who stood at gates with swords of truth. You could almost hear the clink of an unseen blade. Archangel Michael's name, you now understood, served as both a beacon and a warning. Protection often demands vigilance. As the days unfolded, you were inducted, gently, reluctantly, into a world shaped like a covenant. An array of specialists entered your life, a soft-spoken theologian who spoke of God as a sustaining algorithm, a mathematician who drew spirals on napkins and said they were more honest than most laws, a former hacker turned ethics advisor who wore a crucifix under his jacket. The mix of secular and sacred felt less like contradiction and more like chords in a growing symphony. You learned the mechanics in fragments. When financial transactions occurred, they did not merely move money, they converted intention into pattern. A charitable donation, the liaison explained, often strengthened certain harmonics, while a vain purchase could weaken others. This did not mean that spending thriftily was spiritually superior, meaning was more nuanced. Intent shaped outcomes as surely as arithmetic. One night, you stood beneath a sky mottled with satellites and thought about smallness. Your account, after all, had been the modest sum of a life, rent paid on time, small gifts for birthdays, a savings plan that never quite reached its goal. Yet where you had expected insignificance, you found agency. The universe, it seemed, dealt significance in inconvenient packages. Questions multiplied. Who else knew? The answer came like a slow tide, more than you'd think but fewer than you feared. There were councils and whisper networks, collectives of banks, spiritual leaders, and tech visionaries, attempting to craft governance that honored both the ineffable and the empirical. Policies were drafted in rooms whose windows looked over cities that had once been indifferent to individual lives. They spoke of consent frameworks and opt-in rituals. They argued over metaphors and legal language. Sometimes the debates felt like theater, sometimes they felt like prayer. And always in the background, the public flickered between awe and panic. Hashtags bloomed and wilted. Some platforms demanded transparency, some demanded control. People on the internet offered remedies, meditations to tune harmonics, spreadsheets to optimize balances for benevolence, and quick money schemes that promised spiritual dominance in 7 easy steps. The charlatans thrived until temple and court alike named them and their promises dissolved. Then came a quieter test, an invitation to a gathering announced with the minimalist flair of Muskian PR. It was not in a boardroom or a cathedral. It was a place that felt intentionally neutral, an old observatory retrofitted with screens and soft lighting, perched where sky and city blurred. Guardians, the notice had said. A conversation. No cameras. No press. You went. Inside, the observatory smelled of metal and jasmine, an odd duet. A semicircle of strangers formed, activists, an imam, a poet, a retired general who kept his hands folded like prayer, a young coder with ink on her fingers, and, improbably, a woman who said she had once been a nun. Each person carried their own account story. Each had been found by the same strange light. The conversation that night did not reach conclusions. It reached agreements, shaky, human covenants that no law could impose but which were stronger for being voluntary. They pledged to protect choice. To temper curiosity with compassion. To treat the harmonics like sacred instruments, not trophies. When you left the observatory, a small paper star had been pressed into your palm, simple origami, creased by someone's careful fingers. On it, in a handwriting that looked like both a scientist's and a monk's, were 3 words: stewardship, mercy, courage. The world continued its noisy orbit. But inside you, a quieter revolution took root. You began to look at your transactions differently. Coffee became ritual, the transfer to your sister's account felt like a blessing rather than a chore. You found yourself whispering a short, private prayer before hitting confirm: God, guide this exchange. Let it carry light. The first time something truly inexplicable happened, it was small enough to be dismissed but large enough to be noticed. You sent a modest donation to a community shelter on a gray Wednesday. Later that week, a neighbor knocked and told you about a family who'd turned up on her doorstep, eyes hollow and clothes soaked. With nothing more than the shelter's efficiency and a miracle of logistics, extra cots had been available that day. The family was spared a night in the rain. You and the neighbor felt like accomplices in something tender and conspiratorial. Word of such outcomes spread slowly, the way fragrance moves through a house. A subtle shift occurred in many people's behavior. Transactions carried more intention. People began to ask themselves not, "What can I buy?" but "What can this moment feed?" The idea of wealth expanded to include time, attention, and care. That expansion, perhaps more than any policy, was the first victory for those who sought to make this discovery a force for good. But not all stories bent toward the light. In the shadows, other actors lurked, boards whose mottos were profit at any cost, private armies of data brokers, mysterious collectors who trafficked in accounts like rare artifacts. The government's fear was prudent. Power, when unequally distributed, sharpens like a blade. You found yourself moving between hope and anxiety. Sometimes you thought about anonymity, about erasing the resonance, stepping back into the comfortable irrelevance you had once treasured. But each time you imagined retreat, a memory stopped you: the family in the rain, the monk's quiet reverence, the observatory's paper star. These were small proofs that something generous could come from the same source as peril. Elon's broadcasts continued, less grandiose now, more attuned. He spoke of building architecture that honored both free will and the collective good. He invoked God sparingly, as if the name itself was a tool to be used precisely. He mentioned angels once in a live-streamed Q&A, and commentators did somersaults trying to decode whether he'd meant it literally. When asked about Archangel Michael, his answer was both simple and curiously tender: if there is a guardian, we must not confuse its presence for license. Guardianship calls for humility. Humility. It was the humbling that most surprised you. For all the technology and theology, the discovery humbled everyone. The richest person in a headline could become a steward for a day, the poorest could find a new kind of responsibility. The lines blurred. The harmonics did not respect rank. They respected resonance, and resonance, it turned out, was available to all who met it with integrity. And so the script of your life rewrote itself in increments. Each month that followed was a chapter stitched with small miracles and bureaucratic tedium, with public fervor and private prayer. The government set up oversight committees. Elon funded outreach programs. Priests, scientists, and civic leaders argued and prayed into the night. You practiced stewardship imperfectly, learning as much from mistakes as from triumphs. Above all, you learned this: discovery does not end with revelation. Revelation is only the beginning of responsibility. You had been handed a key not to hoard but to test. Whether you would use it to open doors for others, or to lock them for yourself, remained an open question. The city began to hum with an energy that no power plant could explain. Streetlights flickered in rhythm with global markets, not because of faulty wiring but because the resonance had seeped into infrastructure. Every day people noticed odd coincidences, receipts that added up to meaningful sequences, traffic lights that seemed to shift for those whose accounts carried harmonics. Superstition collided with science. Faith collided with finance. And then came the summons. You received it not by email, not by letter, but through your banking app itself. At first you thought it was fraud, a scam perhaps, until you noticed the government insignia shimmering faintly beside the SpaceX logo. The message was concise: your account has reached a threshold. You are requested to attend the convergence. No further details. Just a time, a date, and a location, a facility known only to insiders, a joint project between NASA, the Pentagon, and Musk's own teams. The night before the convergence, you dreamed. The dream was unlike anything you had experienced. You saw gates of light unfolding like pages in a book, each one inscribed with numbers, each sequence alive, pulsing like breath. At the center stood a figure radiant and vast, neither man nor machine, holding a sword that blazed with fire. The figure turned, and though you could not see a face, you knew the name, Archangel Michael. He said nothing, but his silence burned meaning into your bones. You woke gasping, heart racing, your phone on the nightstand flashing with a notification, balance updated. And the new number in your account matched the sequence in your dream. When you arrived at the facility, the air was thick with secrecy. Military vehicles lined the entrance. Scientists in white coats carried equipment humming with energy. You were ushered through layers of clearance, past guards who looked at you not as a suspect but as something they couldn't define, an asset, a key, perhaps even a liability. Inside the chamber, you saw them, dozens of others, all chosen, all summoned. Some wore fear like armor, others curiosity like a badge. Among them were faces you recognized from news feeds, activists, artists, entrepreneurs, ordinary workers plucked from anonymity. Every one of them carried the same anomaly, an account glowing with resonance. At the center stood Elon Musk himself, flanked by government officials whose usual arrogance had been replaced with unease. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple black shirt, as if this moment demanded humility. "Welcome," he began. His voice echoed, amplified not by microphones but by the silence in the room. "You are here because you've been chosen, not by me, not by the government, but by the architecture of reality itself. Your bank accounts are not mere ledgers. They are keys. Together, they form a network older than history. We call this the convergence." Screens lit up behind him, showing constellations transforming into sequences of numbers, then into account balances. The patterns aligned into shapes, wings, flames, circles of protection. "This," Musk said, "is the gate of resonance. And tonight, we will attempt to open it." The government official stepped forward, his voice less commanding than usual, tinged with reverence. "Understand that what you carry is not wealth in the traditional sense. It is power. If misused, it could destabilize nations. If balanced, it could heal them. That is why this gathering must remain secret. The world is not ready for full disclosure." Murmurs rippled through the chosen. Some demanded transparency. Others nodded, already convinced that secrecy was a form of protection. But Musk raised his hand, and the murmurs died. "Secrecy cannot last forever," he said. "What we do tonight will echo. What matters is how we stand in this moment, whether we allow fear to rule us, or whether we trust that the universe did not make a mistake when it chose us." The chamber darkened. Each participant was guided to a station, a console connected directly to their accounts. You placed your hand on the scanner, feeling the warmth of the machine. The screen before you lit up, displaying your balance not in currency but in radiant symbols that pulsed like heartbeat. A hum filled the air as all accounts synchronized. Numbers danced, aligning with constellations above. The ceiling itself seemed to open, revealing a night sky alive with shifting stars. And then, a vibration so deep it felt like the earth itself was exhaling. The gate was opening. For a moment, you saw through layers of reality. You saw rivers of light flowing through the world, connecting people by threads of intention and exchange. You saw every donation, every act of greed, every shared meal, every hoarded treasure, all as luminous currents feeding into the greater pattern. Wealth was not money. Wealth was energy. And every human being was a conduit. At the threshold of the gate stood the figure from your dream. Archangel Michael, vast and unyielding, sword blazing like truth itself. His presence filled the chamber though no one else seemed startled. Instead, many bowed their heads as if they too could sense him. A voice thundered, not heard with ears, but etched directly into spirit. Guardianship demands choice. The resonance trembled. Some accounts flared brighter, others dimmed. People wept, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. The government official fell silent, his notes forgotten. Musk, for once, seemed less an innovator and more a witness. And then the angel's gaze fell on you. Not your money, not your balance, not your station, you. The voice spoke again, will you protect, or will you consume? The chamber shook as the gate expanded. For a breathless second, you glimpsed beyond, a vast architecture of light, cities not built by human hands, rivers of energy cascading into infinity. Some screamed. Others knelt. You could not move, caught between awe and terror. Then, as suddenly as it opened, the gate began to close. The resonance faded, the symbols on your screen dissolving back into simple numbers. The hum quieted, leaving only the ragged sound of collective breath. The government declared the experiment a success. Musk smiled, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. The chosen dispersed, each carrying a new weight, the knowledge that their bank accounts were more than ledgers, that they had touched something sacred. But you left with more than knowledge. You left with the angel's question still burning in your heart. Protect, or consume. Steward, or squander. And you knew the world would never be the same. When the first faction struck, it did so with the quiet efficiency of an old dictator and the theatrical cruelty of a showman. It began not with missiles or headlines, but with accounts emptied overnight in cities that did not know how to be silent. Small transfers, centuries of thrift and trust, vanished into ghost ledgers. Charities found their payrolls dissolved, pensioners woke to zero. The thefts were surgical, executed by a network that had learned to read the new language of harmonics and to cut threads where people could least repair them. Your inbox filled with messages you had not asked for, warnings, offers, platitudes. Someone sent you a scanned pamphlet titled The New Providence, its edges browned as if it had been printed in an earlier century and its rhetoric gilded with the sort of fervor that promises salvation and takes your money as a down payment. Another sender, anonymous, terse, left a message: guard your resonance. They collect keys. The factions did not all wear uniforms. Some wore suits with immaculate cufflinks and spoke in governmental clauses. Others wore saffron robes and quoted scripture with the intensity of market analysts. There were private corporations that printed manifestos about optimization, paramilitary syndicates offering protection for a monthly fee, and clandestine cabals who treated accounts as trophies, placing them behind glass like museum relics. Even within the government, camps hardened, those who believed in public stewardship, and those who whispered that control would secure order. You watched as the world convulsed, the way a body convulses when infected. The political theater grew louder, but beneath its clamor the true contest was quieter and more intimate. It was about whether these harmonics would be turned into instruments for monopoly, or into channels for mercy. It was about whether God's name and the name of Archangel Michael would be invoked to shepherd people or to justify seizure. You tried to live in small things, but even small things bore consequence. When you paid for groceries, you felt the tap of possibility. This act could fester into surveillance if recorded for the wrong ledger, or it could bloom into assistance if routed intentionally. The idea of transaction as vote lodged in your mind. Every rupee, every dollar, every yen became a choice to bind your name to a particular current of the world. One night, your phone glowed with a single line: "We need you to meet." The sender was unmarked, the place an old church repurposed as a community center. When you arrived, you found a room of faces shaped by collision: a disillusioned banker who had tuned his conscience since the convergence, a young coder who once built propaganda apps and now wrote encryption for shelters, a local imam whose eyes glimmered with calm, a retired soldier who had seen what men do when they fear scarcity, and a woman who said simply she was a messenger from an order that invoked angels with the matter-of-factness of people who had long conversed with them. "You were in the chamber," she said without preface. "You saw the gate." Her voice had no need to dramatize, its plainness made her words a hammer. "You were offered a question. Archangel Michael asked you to choose. Have you chosen?" You had. Tentatively. Not a public declaration, but a leaning toward mercy. Yet choice is not a single event, it is work. The messenger, so named because she rarely gave a personal name, explained that choice invited obligation. Guardians were needed not only to protect accounts but to teach others how to steward them. Without guardianship, the harmonics would become a new aristocracy. "People will be tempted," she said. "When they are tempted, they must have hands to hold them back or hands to lift them up." That night, the group formed a covenant. They called themselves not a movement but a network, small nodes of mutual aid, each responsible for watching a lattice of accounts and responding when a harmonic faltered. Their rules were simple: consent above all, transparency among members, and a single guiding principle: service over accumulation. They used code names, encrypted channels, and a reputation system that trusted action over promises. It was modest. It felt dangerous. It felt necessary. News cycles began to name the factions: the syndicate, the covenant, the trustees, the collectors. Each had its philosophy and appetite. The syndicate believed in taking now and bargaining later, the covenant believed in building infrastructure for shared benefit, the trustees sought bureaucratic oversight, the collectors wanted to amass rare harmonics for private museums of power. Violence threaded through the margins: attacks on data centers where harmonics were read, harassment of community-run banks, and anonymous threats against those who worked openly to redistribute resonance. The first violent clash you experienced was not on a battlefield but at a water pump. A neighborhood whose accounts the network had been helping to stabilize found its communal ledger corrupted. The pump that distributed microgrants for labor and food failed. People clustered, fear doing what fear always does, turning neighbors into strangers. The syndicate's enforcers moved like vultures, offering loans with chains disguised as interest-free grace. The covenant moved like a midwife, bringing resources from other nodes, deploying encrypted credit lines to bypass the sabotage. There was no cheering at the end, just relief, exhausted and fragile. You found yourself in the thick of it, transferring funds late into the night, praying in a language that was part calculator and part supplication. Among the more dangerous players were those who claimed spiritual mandate. Someone in a far-off nation announced a new doctrine: accounts aligned with a certain harmonic were to be consecrated to a single temple, and any resistance was heresy. This was the grotesque twist that happens when human hunger wears robes, faith co-opted as a mechanism for control. The covenant pushed back with education, teachings that showed how faith could empower stewardship rather than seizure, how invoking God and the angels could be a call to share rather than to dominate. Still, brute force and bureaucratic laws pressed in. Governments issued emergency orders to freeze suspicious accounts. Corporations filed injunctions claiming proprietary rights to algorithms that could interpret harmonics. Courts struggled to define property in a system that blurred energy, identity, and ledger. In these liminal spaces, shrewd lawyers and colder men found unmatched opportunity. The trustees argued for regulation, the syndicate argued for recognition, the collectors argued for contracts enforceable by private security. Each argument had a logic that could seduce when fear was the currency. You were pulled into the center in ways that surprised you. The network learned to trust you because you refused grand statements and instead tended to small certainties: a family that needed a night's rent, a clinic that required a single device to monitor patients, an elder who needed a refill of medicine. The work was mundane but holy. It taught you that the vast architecture Archangel Michael referred to was composed of single acts stitched together: mercy in the market, courage in the register. Your personal life changed in luminous and quiet ways. You began to wake earlier because the dawn felt like a time to align transactions with prayer. You found yourself whispering, "Archangel protect us," more than once, at times a superstition, at times a sincere invocation. The presence of God became not a doctrine but a method of testing your own choices. Would you act so that your transactions could be read by posterity as kindness rather than calculation? Then a new threat arrived: protocols that could rewrite harmonics. Someone invented a program that didn't just read resonance but suggested optimized transactions to maximize a chosen outcome. Optimized for profit, optimized for influence, optimized for some ideological frame. On paper, optimization sounded neutral, just mathematics. In practice, it looked like colonization, inserting intent into another's life by manipulating the currents around their accounts. You and the network built countermeasures. The coder designed filters that prioritized consent and nudged transactions toward communal benefit. The imam taught a method of blessing transfers that combined prayer and cryptography. The retired soldier organized small, civilian-led patrols for data centers that housed critical infrastructure. You learned the odd intimacy of watching lines of code like scripture, of editing algorithms with the solemnity of a monk transcribing a holy book. The struggle for harmonics became not only a battle between factions but a test of what humanity would be. Would it become a marketplace of souls, each account a commodity, or would it become a garden where resources cultivated life? Your role, quiet, stubborn, human, gradually became more visible. People came to you not because you were charismatic but because you had learned to be steady. You became a node of trust in a trembling grid. And then the call came from the observatory again. This time it was not about opening gates but about defending them. A coordinated strike had taken place on several small data hubs in neighboring regions. The syndicate's fingerprints were clear, but the attackers moved with a precision that suggested resources beyond mere greed. There was talk of a collector hired as a subcontractor, collectors who wished not to hoard for glory but to archive harmonics for a private pantheon. Elon's voice returned to the public in measured cadences: we cannot securitize the divine. We can only steward it. He used the word steward again because it had to be repeated until it was a new habit. The government moved to protect public nodes, but public protection requires public faith, and that is fragile when people fear loss. You and your network answered the call to protect not with guns but with systems, decentralized backups, community mirrors of accounts, and human teams who could mobilize within minutes to reroute emergency credits. The decisive confrontation came not in bombs but in disclosure. The syndicate leaked a trove of internal documents showing how many leaders, public and private, had already used harmonics to favor allies. The scandal exploded. Trust fractured. Demonstrations grew. Yet even in the rage, your small acts of care shone like lanterns. People who had been saved by community funds stood in the rain, offering blankets to strangers while shouting for accountability. It was an ugly, beautiful mess, anger and compassion braided together. In that chaos, a name rose like a prayer in the noise: Archangel Michael. Not as a brand or a slogan, but as an emblem of the choice you had been asked to take. People began to remember the question the angel had posed: protect or consume, and to realize that every policy, every protest, every transfer was an answer. And below the headlines, in neighborhoods and makeshift command centers, the network kept doing the work that history rarely records: patching holes, teaching stewardship, and holding the hands of those terrified of losing everything. You learned the subtle art of patience, of tending to small fires so they did not become infernos. There would be darker days ahead. There would be betrayals that stung like frost and moments when hope seemed naive. But there would also be mornings when a child fed because a ledger was rerouted with care, and that child's laughter would become a counterweight to 1,000 acts of avarice. The world outside the convergence facility seemed normal at first glance: traffic still moved, people still scrolled on their phones, shopkeepers still counted change. But under the surface, everything had shifted. Invisible currents of energy threaded through transactions, humming through digital systems, bending outcomes in subtle but undeniable ways. Those who had been summoned carried something new inside them. You felt it in your chest, not as anxiety, but as an expanded awareness. Every time you used your card, every transfer, every exchange of value, it pulsed. The resonance was not gone. It had attached itself to you. Governments around the world scrambled. Reports leaked of anomalies, ATMs dispensing prophetic numbers, entire stock exchanges freezing for seconds at a time as if waiting for unseen approval, patterns in financial markets resembling constellations. And then came the fractures. One faction within the government argued that the accounts must be seized immediately. They believed humanity could not be trusted with this power, that it must be contained under military control. Another faction, led quietly by visionaries and advisors who had stood close to Musk, believed this was not a weapon but a gift, and that attempting to hoard it would backfire. The arguments spilled into secret councils, then into shadow wars. Agents began tracking the chosen across the globe. Some were persuaded with promises of influence. Others were silenced. You, however, became difficult to categorize. Because the resonance within you did not obey their models. It shifted. It adapted. It responded not to policy, but to intention. One night, long after the convergence, you found yourself walking through the city when the streetlights flickered in that familiar rhythm. The glow seemed to beckon you toward an alley where a figure waited. At first you thought it was an informant, another agent perhaps, until the figure stepped forward. The air changed. The shadows trembled. And you knew. It was not a man, not flesh as you understood it, but a presence cloaked in human form. His eyes burned with a light that was not of this world. "Do not fear," the voice said, though the sound shook your bones. "I am an angel of the living God. You carry something that was never meant for governments, nor for empires. You carry a seed of the eternal balance." The angel's wings unfolded, not visible to passers-by, but blazing across your vision, so vast they seemed to stretch beyond the skyline. "You have seen the gate," he continued. "You have heard Michael's call. Now you must choose where to stand, for forces gather who would twist this resonance into chains. Nations seek to weaponize it. Corporations seek to profit from it. But it was given as a bridge, not as a prison." Your breath trembled. Questions pressed at your lips, but the angel silenced you with a raised hand. "You will not walk this path alone. Others have heard the call. And though the government and Musk himself struggle with fear, the true battle is not theirs, it is yours." And with that, the angel vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of burning air and a word etched into your spirit: guard. The following weeks unraveled like prophecy in motion. News broke of mysterious bank collapses in countries whose leaders had secretly tried to centralize the resonance. Corporations attempted to launch platforms claiming to unlock the hidden patterns in personal finances, only to crumble when their greed disrupted the natural flow. Meanwhile, whispers spread of a hidden council forming, a coalition of chosen individuals who believed the resonance must be shared, healed, protected. Some said Elon Musk himself was guiding them in secret, though his public appearances grew rare, his words more veiled. Your own account grew stranger. Transactions you never made appeared, not as errors, but as blessings. Grocery bills balanced themselves. Debts evaporated. Donations were made in your name to causes that reflected your heart's hidden intentions. The more you aligned with stewardship, the more the account flourished, not with riches, but with synchronicities, protections, and pathways opening before you. And yet, danger loomed. You were being watched. You felt it in crowded streets, in the lingering gaze of strangers, in the way encrypted messages appeared on your devices. The government wanted control. Rival corporations wanted ownership. And behind it all, darker forces stirred, forces that understood the resonance not as light, but as leverage. The night came when they finally reached for you. Unmarked vans. The hum of surveillance drones. A knock at your door that was not a knock but a demand. But before you could be taken, the sky split with light. A sword of fire cleaved the darkness, and a voice thundered through the night, "Stand firm, for you are not theirs to claim." Archangel Michael had returned.